Yeah, my name is Jim Gavin, and I'm originally from White Bear Lake, Minnesota, and I grew up in a family of 7 children, and I was the oldest. I went to Catholic church, I went to Catholic grade school, I went to Catholic high school, and I was raised in the Catholic faith, and had my catechism teachings from my first grade on, and began to learn about all the lessons of the Bible through the teachings of the Catholic Church. And as I grew in the Catholic Church, I began to get an awareness of God and Jesus and the Holy Trinity and the Virgin Mary and all the different central figures that we talk about within the Catholic Church. And I always remember the old songs, Ave Maria, and the wonderful music in our church, and the ceremony of the Catholic Church, and how good I would always feel when I went to confession on Saturday night, and when I had all my sins forgiven, I could go and receive Holy Communion on Sunday morning with a pure heart. And it was so refreshing to be able to have my sins forgiven. But it was interesting, my sins were always the same the next week. And but I would always have them forgiven, and I'd go on to try to become, I guess, a better person. But after graduation from high school, I went into college for about a year, and this was the time of the Vietnam War. And I had decided at that time that my friends and I were beginning to talk about the possibility of doing some service. They were drafting people into the military at that time. You could go into the Army or the Marine Corps, the Navy or the Air Force. And I decided to join the Navy. And I became a boot camp trainee back in 1967. And after I got out of boot camp, I was assigned to a ship and went off to Southeast Asia. And I served over there for about a year and a half. And then I had an accident when I was on shore leave in Japan. And I had an apartment over there. Every time we go into Yokosuka, Japan, my friends and I, we'd rent an apartment. And one night I fell off the balcony onto the driveway, and I had a very bad accident. I ended up in the hospital, and that kind of began a change in my life. I began to be more reflective, began to read different philosophical books, and began to look more deeply into the meaning of life. And I was reading Tolstoy, I was reading Tolkien's The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and all those popular books back in that time, and began to think more ideally about what a world would be like without war. And I got to the point where I always thought that there should be a different kind of world than the world that we lived in, where people had to kill one another. And I was in the Navy, and actually we probably were killing people, in the work that I was doing, and I began to feel some kind of contradiction. And I began to feel maybe I should be doing something else with my life. And I was home-ported in Alameda, California. And being in the Bay Area, we did different things when we were in port. And I started to study transcendental meditation in Berkeley, California. And I got into meditating quite a bit. And I had a friend of mine, Jerry Capelli. He was on a ship with me, and I asked him if he'd like to come over and meditate with me. And so he came over. He began to study transcendental meditation as well, and began to go to the church and study the Bible. I'd go to Bible study every week, and began to understand from the perspective of this church a little bit deeper understanding of Jesus Christ and His mission, and we would study things like the nature of God. And one of the things that I had a question about, I always would bring it up to my minister. if God is our Father, how could he condemn anyone to hell for eternity, to burn forever? And that was one of the things that I really couldn't understand. How could God do this to his own children? Because certainly I couldn't do that to my children, no matter how bad they were. And so I'd asked my minister these questions, and I didn't think he really had a good answer to the questions that I had. But I continued to study, and I decided at one point he didn't have all the answers, so I had to get better answers than that. So I decided to go to the seminary that was connected to this church. And so I signed up to enroll in the seminary in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and was going to seminary right after I got out of the Navy. And that's what I had decided to do. And meanwhile, Jerry Capelli, the young man that was serving on the ship with me, he had met members of the Unification Movement in Berkeley, California on campus. And he had gone over to the center in Oakland, and he had begun to study the divine principle. And he came up to me on the ship one day and he said, Jim, I came over to the Transcendental Meditation lectures and understood that with you, and I was wondering if you'd like to look into something that I think is really interesting, and it's this Unified Family, this group that I met in Berkeley, and they have the center in Oakland. Would you like to come over and hear what they are teaching? And I said, well, sure, I'll come on over. And I came over, and there were just a Korean woman, there was a Japanese sister, there was an American sister, and then there was a Chinese sister, all living in this one center. And so I began to listen to some of the teachings that they had regarding the Bible, and the nature of God, and the fall of man, and the mission of Jesus, and the course of restoration that God took from Adam to Noah to Abraham to Jacob to Moses to Jesus, and on into the time that we live in today. And it was so fascinating, the answers that I was beginning to get from the questions that I had always had in the Christian church that I was attending. They began to give me real answers. They began to give me very exciting understandings of the nature of God. And I began to understand that God is a suffering God, that God's been suffering ever since the fall of man. In Genesis 6:6, it says that it grieved God to his heart that man had fallen away from him. And I realized it wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't part of God's plan. Otherwise, how could he be sorry about it? How could he be grieving about it, that he had lost his children? And I realized that God was a suffering God, that he is longing for his children to return. And that was the whole course of human history, was for God's children to be able to return to him. And that's why that was Noah's mission, that was Abraham's mission, that was Jacob's mission, Moses' mission, Jesus' mission, to bring, as Jesus said, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And that is what God's course of restoration has been leading to all this time throughout human history, is to return this world from the kingdom of hell to the kingdom of heaven. And I thought that they were so clear in being able to teach about God and his nature and his desire and his purpose for our lives, that I began to really become frightened. I became very frightened about the teaching, because I realized that these people knew more than anybody that I'd ever met about God and his nature and our purpose in life. And I felt that these people must be really good or they must be really bad. In the Bible it says that beware of false prophets, because many will come in the last days. And you read in Matthew that Jesus also taught us that you will know them by their fruits. A good tree will bear good fruits, and a bad tree will bear bad fruits or evil fruits. And then I began to think about these people that I was studying with in Oakland, and I realized that these people seemed to be very, very good. And I finally got out of the Navy and decided I would join this community of people that were up to building something that was more than just a church. They wanted to break down the races between religion. They wanted to break down the races, the barriers between races. They wanted to break down the barriers between cultures, and that God was yearning to see this happen, that God was yearning to see religious believers all worship Him as one, that God was yearning to see the racial barriers broken apart. And you know, back in those days, that was the days of segregation, and Martin Luther King, he was on the scene at that time, and these were all the great questions of the day, and Reverend Moon had the answers to them. Reverend Moon had a real answer straight from God, and it really penetrated my heart and my being, and I decided this is where I wanted to be. This is what I wanted to do. And they asked me at the church that I'd been attending if I was ready to go to the seminary. And I asked the pastor, I said, why don't you come over before I go to the seminary and check this out? I think I found some answers here that I couldn't find anywhere else. And I want you to come on over and meet some of these people and hear some of these teachings and find out for yourself what this is all about. And, you know, he never came over. He never took the time to look into the divine principle. He never took the time or the interest to follow up with me. And here was a person who would attend in his church week after week after week and had been signed up to go to his seminary that he had graduated from, and he wouldn't take the time to come over and check it out. I don't know exactly what stopped him from coming over, but he never came, and I decided, well, maybe that's another sign for me. This is a sign I'm in the right place at the right time. So I began to continually study the divine principle. Now, that was 1971.